the first ever Lives at Stake, a series of monthly discussions about issues facing trans and gender nonconforming communities across the United States. I feel like there should be a balloon drop, but well, quarantine. Not surprisingly, our first show today will focus on the ways in which trans and gender nonconforming communities are addressing and responding to the COVID crisis. Trans and gender nonconforming communities have done so with speed and focus, emphasizing solidarity in ways that are a model for the country as a whole. Perhaps because of historic marginalization, trans and gender nonconforming communities understand that the only way through is together. So ultimately, today's show is about hope. That's why we're going to talk to India Moore, actress, model, and activist, about a mutual aid program that they started right in the wake of the crisis. We'll then talk to Bev Tillery, who is the executive director of the Anti-Violence Project, about how they're responding to the uptick in violence in the wake of the COVID crisis, unfortunately. We'll then speak to Ian Stewart about food insecurity amongst trans and gender nonconforming communities. Ian is a actress and the founder of the Oprah Project. I should also say Ian Field Stewart to make sure that I nail their entire name properly. We'll then talk to Mickey B, who is national organizer at the Transgender Law Center, about the importance of the leadership of Black women, Black trans women, and Black trans femmes at this moment. Concluding with author Meredith Toulouse, and we need to talk about what to read at this moment. So what better than Meredith talking about her new book, which will be released in May. And then finally, we will end with the poetry of Swai Pham. Now, since this is the first Lives at Stake, I want to take a moment to tell you what it is. It is a joint effort of WNYC, the Green Space, as a part of my place as the first ever journalist in residence there, and my program Translash, which is a media project which works to center the stories and narratives of trans and gender nonconforming people at a time of social backlash, historic violence, and social and political erasure in every single way. The rationale for Lives at Stake then is pretty straightforward. We need to be able to create at this time forums that are by and for us. Now, normally I would be speaking to you in the actual green space and looking out on your faces, as well as interacting with you virtually. But instead, I'm standing before you looking out on my bathroom. But I'm glad to be standing before you at all, given where we are in this moment. Gratitude is one of the things that is getting me through. Now, a couple of things in terms of housekeeping before we turn to the heart of our program. First of all, this is a virtual program, so that means it is virtual/interactive. So please make sure that you comment and send questions across all of our social media channels, including Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, with hashtag Lives at Stake and also Translash. We also want to let you know that throughout you will be hearing a string of resources, places, and organizations that have rushed to help and to respond. Please know that those will be in our feed. So you can't say she's talking too fast, I didn't hear her. Just engage on the feed and it will be there. We also want to let you know that this entire concept for our program in terms of focusing on COVID and doing it virtually is something that we came up with in the last 7 days. So there might be a few technical hitches along the way. If so, bear with us. And in terms of ASL, we will be working on that in terms of future programs, but in this program, the ASL version will be immediately following the show. Now, because today's show is really, really heavy, we hope not too heavy. Like I said, it is about hope, but there are gonna be some moments where we talk about some tough things. We wanted to start out with some memes and GIFs that are actually getting us through this really tough moment. I think that creativity and humor are things that are life rafting me at this moment. So we wanted to turn first to the issue of you guys not listening to mayors and city council people and all of the rest of it who are giving you guidance to stay at home. This is a graphic.
Come on! That's right! You better start! Come on, Teddy! Come on, Teddy! Yes!
Isolation, maybe I wouldn't be so upset if he followed me home. The next one is a GIF that is focused on the fact that all of you all are streaming, I guess, Tiger King. I personally don't have enough brain cells for it, but this is focusing on Joe Exotic, and just emphasizes the fact that after a couple of months in isolation and quarantine, we may end up looking like this because we don't have access to people to do our nails and our hair and thread. So I don't know, look at some how-to videos on YouTube to not look like him. It's not a good look, folks. And then lastly, there's a meme that we wanted to choose that is just so on trend. It's Zoom. We're all using Zoom. We're using Zoom right now to talk to each other. I am still trying to, as I told everyone before this program, honestly figure out how to do Zoom calls in my robe, but we are working on that. Maybe next time. I do have a purple one that zips all the way to the top, but we'll see. So one other thing before we turn to our program, there was a loss in our community this week, Lorena Borjas, and we are thinking about her tonight as an activist in this moment and a leader. We will be talking about her legacy throughout the program, but wanted to make sure that we acknowledged her presence at the beginning. On to our first guest. Our first guest is actor and model India Moore, who is perhaps best known for their role on the hit show Pose as Angel, and of course for their amazing performance as Goddess in Queen and Slim. But tonight we are talking to India about their decision and action to create a mutual aid program in the wake of the COVID crisis. India goes by the pronouns they and them. India, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a really beautiful program, and yeah, it's Trans Day of Remembrance, and I feel really grateful to be on with these lovely ladies and folks who are doing the work. But I hope everyone is staying home and being safe and checking on their community folks and on their elders as much as possible.
Well, thank you for that. That's a beautiful way to start. I think that, you know, one of the things that is just true about you is that before you became a star on all the screens, that you're very much rooted in community. So the fact that you're here tonight makes all the sense in the world for a lot of reasons. So thank you for joining us. I wanted to ask you first, before going into the heart of why you decided to do what you do around this crisis, is first of all, how are you doing? How are you making out 2 weeks after the world turned upside down?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. You know, I have a place to stay, and I'm in Chicago with my partner, and I'm really grateful that I have a space to be at, and we have what we need. But I'm good. You know, like, I've been taking it easy. The stillness has been a lot. I've been feeling a little anxious around just being too still. But it's been a beautiful, I think, time to just reflect on myself, reflect on what the future looks like, and you know, what my part looks like in the future, and just like arranging and thinking about things that I haven't really gave myself time to. I think it's been a great time to catch up on books, and I haven't been writing as much as I would like to, but it's also been I think, like, grounding, just to be able to you know, like, be in a space.
Well, I think you'll have plenty of time to write, so like that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
One of the first things that I noticed in terms of a response was actually your Instagram feed, where I was feeling personally stunned and hit and like a duck hit on the head after, the declaration of being quarantined and the way in which people were sequestered. But you responded almost immediately by saying, you know what, we need to raise money for people and put it directly in their hands. And I'm wondering what led you to do that? How did you know that was the right thing to do?
Well, there are a couple of things. I think people are like, oh, this has never happened before. But this has happened before, and it's affected predominantly Black and brown folk, but more so queer and trans people. When the AIDS crisis happened, uh, there was an epidemic, and you know, a lot of people don't know about it because nothing was done. Um, no one organized to make sure that people, who couldn't afford care were getting it, for queer and trans people specifically. And it was just interesting to see like the shift in just any shift in the system. I'm always thinking about how queer and trans people are keeping up, like from the election of Donald Trump to, like a pandemic to this degree. So just like, I don't know, I was just thinking about all of those things, and like, I'm just always thinking about community when, especially when there's a systemic shift of some sort, because our community is the last to be sought out for, until the last to be looked after. And also, trans people, Black trans women, more particularly, and trans people who have medically transitioned, I think are really vulnerable during this time when the system is interrupted at this level.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us don't have, family members, communities, and access to resources. And so I don't know. I'm always thinking about Black trans women and gender non-conforming and queer folk. And
Yeah, I think that one of the things that it's hard for people who are not necessarily a part of our community is to understand the degree of marginalization. So I'm wondering if you can just give people a sense of literally how much people were asking for and the types of things that they were asking for in terms of asking for help through your drive.
Well, a lot of folks were asking for food, asking for money, particularly for food. A lot of folks were really worried about eating. And this is the pattern that I saw in the messages, that a lot of folks were concerned about eating and keeping their phone bill paid. Like, these are essentials. We need our phones. We need to be able to connect to each other, especially during this time. And, like, a lot of folks are also really afraid of not being able to afford their rent and pay for their electric bills. And the average donation was $50 to $100, depending on what people shared with me in terms of what they needed. But I can't like pay entire phone bills, like, or pay entire electrical bills, or like people's rent at this time. I don't have access to those kinds of resources, but I have been able, to get funds around, redistribute funds enough to get to as many people as possible, and also get groceries just long enough to sustain for at least or around 2 weeks. I felt like Cash App was the most accessible way for people to let me know that Cash App and Instagram, like me checking my DMs, people sending messages and me checking them. And I felt like Cash App was just really simple and accessible. I didn't want to do anything too complicated. And I wanted it to be fast,
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to set up like another Instagram but I didn't want to complicate anything too much.
Yeah.
But yeah.
One of the and just an audience note, if anyone has questions for India, please send those in and we will be able to ask those while while they are joining us. One of the questions that I had for you as well is, you mentioned that, I personally don't have this type of resource to pay, these types of, to meet the needs of people. But there are a lot of institutions and foundations that do have the ability to do that. And so I'm wondering if you could say anything to people who have those type of resources in terms of what they need to be doing to respond to the needs of trans people in the wake of this moment. What would you say?
Yeah, I think, institutions that, whose main goal and objective is to look out for LGBTQ folk. I don't see those institutions generally prioritizing or looking out particularly for the most vulnerable in our community, which are Black trans women, and trans folk, who depend on medical resources to survive. And I don't really see that happening for Black and brown trans women, who are the most vulnerable, particularly Black trans women. And so, I think a lot more of that should happen. I think it's really important that we look out for our community as a whole, because we're all victimized by this heteronormative system, what a CIS. But I think folks are aware of the degree that Black trans women and trans women in general are being targeted, and are being neglected and are being ostracized, and don't have connections to our families and other resources. So I think, especially during this time, while these institutions exist to be in service to us, I think when we're in this situation where there's a virus that is completely debilitating our economy, and people's ability to create an income to pay for their essentials.
Yeah.
I think orgs that look out for the most vulnerable, particularly around queer and trans people, should definitely look out for trans folks. And there are other programs like the Orchid Project that Ian has created and organized. And I think they should definitely source resources and support programs that are actually on the ground and providing this level of support.
Yeah. Well, thank you for humanizing and making it plain for people to understand why direct response and mutual aid is really important, and being a symbol of how you can do that. I have one really quick question for you. There are lots of different ways that people are getting through. And so I'm wondering, as an actor, if you could tell people what you are streaming on video.
Oh, like TV and film?
Yes, like TV, like your job.
Oh, wait, sorry, say that again?
Yeah, like TV, like what are you watching on like Netflix or Hulu?
Oh, okay. I just saw the platform, and I have questions about the way the story was told, and other political ways, but I think it was really interesting. It's a really interesting, I think, conceptualization of classism, and I think it's a great metaphor for our system, the film. So you should check it out. But it's also really gory and graphic. So I, just trigger warning.
Gory, graphic, political, class-oriented. It sounds like now.
It is.
So
it is.
We will check it out. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been speaking with India Moore, who is an actor and model and activist known extremely well for their role as Angel on the hit show Pose, and of course recently for their role as Goddess in Queen and Slim. In terms of mutual aid projects, if you go to our thread, we have posted a link to a webinar by a group of LGBTQI plus BIPOC people in California who actually raised $150,000 in this effort to so that you can see how to replicate it yourself in terms of what India did. It's a how-to and do's and don'ts and things that you probably ran into, like limits on Cash App that they give guidance on. And as well, we're posting right now a whole host of mutual aid programs that are still up and running right now. Ones that are aimed at sex workers in Atlanta. Of course, Lorena Borjas, right before she died, had one focus on trans sex workers, created that in the wake of the COVID crisis, ones in San Francisco, all across the country. So go to our feed, check those out, and figure out how to help people who are most in need. Now, going on to the issue of physical and emotional security, moving on from financial security, which is what India addressed. We are now going to speak with Bev Tillery, who is the executive director of the Anti-Violence Project, about the uptick nationwide in violence in the wake of the COVID crisis, both in terms of hate and domestic and intimate partner violence. But before we bring Bev in, I want to just remind those of you who are just joining us or who joined us late that this is Lives at Stake. I am Imara Jones. You are joining a monthly discussion about trans and gender nonconforming issues. You can join us in the discussion across social media using our hashtags Live at Stake and Translash. Be sure to join us. We're already getting some questions for Bev, so this is exciting. Bev Tillery, who is the executive director of the Anti-Violence Project, goes by the pronouns of she and her. Bev, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Imara, thanks for having me.
Of course. Sadly, we have to have you on, right? We have to have you on because not only is there financial insecurity, but there's now physical and emotional insecurity in the wake of COVID. First, I'm going to start by asking the same question of India, of you that I did India, which is how are you doing as a person before we turn to your job?
You know, thanks for asking. I am personally, I'm hanging in. I actually just came off of 2 weeks of sort of a staycation. I was working as needed, but had a planned vacation because my daughter was on spring break. And so my partner and I and my daughter, we really tried to take a break. And we did a lot of things around the house because we couldn't go anywhere else. So I am back in the thick of it now. And, you know, we are all mourning the loss of Lorena Borjas, my staff especially. I didn't know her as well as some other folks did, but, you know, she was a force and brought many Latinx trans women into our office to get the support that they needed. And we actually are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. And she was one of the folks that we were planning to profile as 40 people who have made an impact in our movement. And we had scheduled a time to do a photo shoot with her that had to get canceled because of COVID. And so we're all in mourning, we're all feeling it, and also feeling the love and support of the community as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, also she was a huge mentor as well, mentoring an entire generation group of activists. So her presence is alive and well, even though physically she's not here. One of the things that people don't necessarily make the connection between is COVID, the coronavirus, and intimate partner and domestic violence. But we do see that there is this link. Can you talk about that and why that is and why our communities are facing that intersection?
Yeah, well, you started talking about the financial insecurity that people experience. And so I think there are a couple of things happening right now. One is that we see over time that when there are periods of economic downturn, that intimate partner violence goes up because the stress of that financial insecurity, um, you know, uh, triggers and exacerbates violence that's happening in the home, and within relationships that that we have that are close to us, and also one of the things that we know is that one of the reasons why people stay in abusive and harmful relationships is because of economic insecurity. So that is happening, uh, in a lot of cases around the country, and particularly impacting our community, as India already said. And then the other thing that is happening is that right now, while people are sheltering in place, there is more likelihood that you are sheltering in place with somebody who's causing you harm. And so you have less opportunity to escape that abuse and violence that you're dealing with. And so when you previously maybe could escape going to a job or going to visit friends or whatever you would do in your daily routine, you can't do that now. And so people are more trapped, and people are calling hotlines and 911 and saying, I am stuck here with this person who is causing me harm. So I think both of those factors are really important, and in what we're seeing right now. And I also just wanted to remind people that when we talk about intimate partner violence, it's a wide range of violence that's not necessarily just coming from an intimate partner per se. But some of this violence that people are experiencing can be from roommates, from landlords, other people who that you're living with, family members. That it doesn't have to be just the partner situation when we talk about intimate partner violence.
Mhm. And we've gotten some posts on our various channels about people who've experienced hate crime violence just over the past 2 weeks. And I'm wondering if there's a link as well somehow between the domestic and intimate partner violence and the hate crime violence. Do they overlap, or are they just totally separate?
Well, there are a lot of ways that they intersect and overlap, particularly for the queer community. What we see a lot of times is that within intimate partner violence situations, the people who are causing harm will use homophobic, transphobic slurs. They will threaten to out people. They might hide someone's HIV medication. If it's a trans person who is being abused, an abusive partner could force them to dress in a manner that doesn't align with their gender identity or expression. Um, because it's about control and power, there are lots of ways that the oppression that we are experiencing outside in society gets used in those relationships as well, as abusive tools. So that's one way that they overlap. And then, again, as our communities are particularly vulnerable right now, there's a lack of resources already in society for queer folks who are experiencing violence. So, before COVID, the resources that we have available to us are so much more limited because of the discrimination and oppression that we deal with every day. And so when you combine that now with a time where it's heightened violence and lack of resources, it means that our communities are even more impacted by this kind of violence right now and more in danger. And so, we have already seen increase in hate violence, particularly targeting folks who are of Asian descent because of COVID. We may see other kinds of violence as well because the tensions are high in our communities and people go to those folks that they feel are dispensable or vulnerable to
Right.
attack and blame for what's going on.
Right. Um, uh, in response, however, AVP has come up with a series of tips and guidelines for people who may be facing domestic or intimate partner violence in various ways. And so I'm wondering if you can just perhaps take us through those, because there are things that people can do in ways that people can help. I think the first one that you mentioned was to define your pod. Can you talk about that and then just take us through the set?
Yeah, and I would say, first of all, we come from a place of understanding and believing that survivors know what they need to get through and to be safe. And so some of these tips are really just reminding folks, because these can be stressful times. Sometimes you might forget the tools that you have. So, identifying your pod is making sure that you've identified who the people are who are going to have your back, who you need to reach out to potentially ahead of time now to say, I'm going to put you on speed dial. These are the people that you can go to when you need support, when you need anything that you need. Identify who they are now so that if you are in a time of crisis, you don't have to think about it. You got your people, you know how to reach them. They know that when you call, they're going to respond and in the way that you need them to respond.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the other tips that you have? What's the next one on the list?
Yeah, so we say to people, hide some of the things that you might need in case you might need to quickly leave a situation that's gotten out of hand or more than you feel like you can deal with in that moment. So think about, what is your safe bag that you need? What do you need in it? Do you need some cash hidden away? Do you need medications potentially? Do you need change of clothing, phone numbers or contact information? If your phone is taken or stolen, what is that information that you need to have? Hide it somewhere where you know that it's safe, that it's unlikely that the person who's causing you harm will find it, so that you can just grab it and go if you need to.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And then, yeah,
no,
I was going to say, we encourage people to, even though we're sheltering in place, we can go outside. And so, while we're being a safe distance away from folks, use time, whether it's, I'm going to exercise, take a walk. If you need to use that time to call somebody that you need to get support, or even just to breathe fresh air and get out of the situation for a period of time, really use that. Don't forget that you can actually leave your apartment for periods of time. And we encourage people to just take advantage of those times and do what they need. And then the last is, call a hotline. You can call AVP. Our hotline is up and running. Our folks are working remotely, but we have staff and volunteers who are answering our hotline 24/7. It's bilingual, English, Spanish. Please call. Folks are there to help safety plan in the immediate. If you need to figure out, or need support in figuring out sort of what to do in the moment, or if you want to figure out how do you access some resources and supports for the long haul. And then if you're in other places around the country, there are anti-violence projects or other organizations that do anti-violence work all around the country. There's a network of them. Many of them are listed on our website, www.avp.org. and you can find them there. So reach out to the organizations that are in the queer community that are there to help survivors of violence.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Understanding that there's this increase in violence, but there are ways to be able to address it and to respond. So there's definitely hope in that. There's one last question I have for you, which is unrelated to the seriousness of right now, which is, I know that you are a master baker, and a lot of people, again, at home have lots of time now to perhaps bake. So what are you baking?
Well, I just baked a gluten-free, sugar-free
Is it good?
apple pear tart. It was amazing. And it was the best gluten-free crust I'd ever made. It was a crumb crust. I highly recommend it. Anybody wants a recipe, let me know.
Well,
So
I'm gonna have to trust you, because when you say gluten-free and sugar-free, I'm walking out the door. But
I know.
you know what? Listen,
know.
I got time on my hands, so I might as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
try it,
well,
definitely.
Well,
I will
honestly,
not do you wrong.
Right. Well, honestly, we cheated a little bit and have put your recipe in the various timelines that we have. So anyone who wants to try gluten-free and sugar-free, go do that. Follow this recipe, and then tell us how it turns out. I've been talking to Beth Tillery, who is the executive director of the Anti-Violence Project. In full disclosure, I'm on the board of AVP, but as you can see, we would have been talking to them anyway. Beth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. You are watching Lives at Stake. I'm Imara Jones. This is the first of a series of monthly discussions about issues facing the trans and gender non-conforming community across the United States. You can follow along at Lives at Stake, hashtag Lives at Stake, and hashtag Translash. I've also gotten yelled at. I'm supposed to tell you to go to www.translash.org, where you can sign up for our monthly newsletter to find out what's going on in between these programs. And you can also go to the same for WNYC, the Green Space, and follow their newsletter too. Lots of newsletters, lots of time, lots of not excuses to not read all of them. So from financial insecurity to physical and emotional insecurity, we are now going to turn to the issue of food insecurity in trans and gender non-conforming communities. That's why I'm thrilled to be talking to Ian Field Stewart, who is an actress and the founder of the Oprah Project, an organization that is focused on providing nutritious meals to people who are trans and gender non-conforming, specifically those who are Black and brown. But in response to COVID, Ian's organization turned very quickly to meet some immediate needs. And so I'm thrilled to be able to talk to Ian. Hi, Ian.
Hey there, Imara. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. How are you? How are you doing?
You know, I've been actually thinking about that question a lot because I knew I was coming here today, and I was thinking about how I wanted to answer it. And I think I want to be very honest in saying that, like, I'm depressed, I'm not doing well. And I say that because I think it's important to acknowledge that capitalism is part of what brought us here, and the necessity to produce and the necessity to create and create things that can be consumed is essential to that process. And so I wanted to acknowledge that there are those of us out there who just don't feel like we're ready to meet or face another day where we can't touch and be touched by people, and we can't be outside. And it has an effect on our mental health. And so I wanted to name that I am one of those people. And if you are out there, anyone who's watching who is one of those people, then I'm right there with you, and I'm holding your back.
Yeah, there are lots of those people out there. And the good news is that there's lots of people who are volunteering to give free therapy sessions. We have a resource page on our website at translash.org. One of those resources is that. There are many others as well, but I think the first step in getting help is acknowledging that there is a problem and an issue. And I think that you've helped a lot of people just by saying that you're depressed, and that we need to be reaching out to each other and supporting each other in this moment. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I also wanted to, of course, thank you for literally helping a few people in the midst of this crisis. And I want you, if you can just set up a little bit, how did you know immediately that that was a thing that you needed to focus on, that you needed to focus on the regular way in which you deliver meals, to literally going grocery shopping and going house to various trans people to deliver food?
I mean, the truth of it is that the Okra Project has always been a way that we have gained access to an understanding that food insecurity is something that Black trans people are facing on a daily basis. I love the show Good Times, and I'm recalling a moment where the mother on the show, Esther Rolls, sort of says, you know, don't forget this family knew we went through the Depression without realizing that there was one. And so in many ways, I feel like that's how the Black trans community is, how we are. This food insecurity is something that affects us at all times. So it's not so much that we knew that there was a specific moment or a specific need. It's just that if people can't go outside, it means they can't go to grocery stores. And for many Black trans people, the communities that we live in, they don't have nutritious foods available to us anyways. And so to first not have access to nutritional and culturally specific food items, but then also to be then faced with not even being able to get to the grocery stores that don't serve you those fresh and non-nutritional and not culturally specific food items is a problem. So we knew that there was a need out there just by virtue of being amongst our community. You know, we are an organization that is made up of 2 Black trans women and one Black cis woman who provides us the money and also lots of support as well. But you know, other than that, like, we are entirely community run and community based. We've always said that this Okra Project does not belong to one specific individual, but belongs to all Black trans people.
One of the things that is true is that this function of creating a mobile grocery store that you've done was something that you didn't expect to do. So it's meant that you've had to kind of create it as you've gone along. And I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you need? And what are some of the things that organizations like yours that are working to provide direct food to people need? So for example, food banks can't be open in the same way. So how are they able to get food out and stockpile and all the rest of it? I'm wondering what some of your challenges are.
I mean, the biggest challenge so far has been storage. The whole reason that we kind of started that mobile Okra Project grocery store was that we had a community partner who was able to donate a large amount of perishable items. And the only place that I could go is to my living room. So we knew that, hey, there is a necessity to get this food out of my house, not just because I have roommates who would like to use the living room at some point, but also because the food has to get to the people and it's perishable. It's going to go bad soon. So the solution that we came up with was to find a volunteer who had a car, and luckily someone responded, hopped in that car, packed everything in the back, and then we're able to drive from house to house. Now, obviously that's not sustainable because we need to be able to, I need to be able to protect my household. We are practicing, social distancing and quarantining, and it's important that we are able to do that. And so basically it's just been a response to everything. We had, when we get food donations, they come here, and the best way that we found to do it is to create these packages of foods. And luckily we've had an amazing amount of financial support from the community and beyond, who have allowed us to take these packages of food that we're able to create through either food donations or grocery store runs that we do ourselves, and then put those in the back of an Uber or a Lyft, and then send those directly to people's homes. And so that's the best way that we have found currently to address sort of no contact food delivery, while also addressing the needs that people just have,
Yeah. Well, if people have ways to help and support you through that kind of innovative way that you have of getting the food and putting it in Ubers and delivering to people, there are links to the Okra Project in our timeline, and you can also look and find those. I'm wondering what in this moment you're hopeful about. You said that you were depressed. You responded in a way that was focused and energized. And so I'm wondering what the hope is, if you have any at this moment, that kind of is behind that.
Absolutely. I think that One of the things about being a Black trans woman is that I've heard all of my life in one way or another that I am a risk, or that I am a diversity hire, or that I am in some way that someone else has to choose me. And the joy that being part of the Ochre Project and founding this organization, this collective, has offered me is a constant reminder that Black trans people, my people, we're going to be okay. Because we always have been and we always find a way. We are the most resourceful people on the planet because we are the most under-resourced people and we have always found ways to survive. I mean, shows like Pose are not coming out of nowhere. They're coming out of resilience. They're coming out of, people like India, like Janet Mock, like these individuals who have come from our community and continue to thrive. But India and Janet and Laverne, all of them, myself, we are not like the special case. Every Black trans person is possible and is capable of creating art, creating futures, creating innovation that is not only vital to the survival of our culture, of everyone's culture, but to the survival of our world. And so in that way, I am vastly aware and confident and hopeful in my people. My people have been here and we aren't going anywhere.
Well, on that note of capability and hope and creativity and possibility, we're going to end this particular segment. I want to thank you for everything that you're doing to address food insecurity in this moment, for your resourcefulness in doing so, and wishing you all the best. People can also follow various projects that you have coming out on Netflix and various web series. So Ian Field Stewart, who is an actress and the founder of the Ochre Project, which is a collective that provides home-cooked meals to Black trans people. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Now, one of the things you may have noticed tonight is just one of the things that Ian mentioned, which is the leadership and the positionality and the response in trans and gender nonconforming communities of Black trans women and Black femmes, and Black women in general with respect to BEV. And that's not a coincidence. That is something that is happening in our community and is needed for the future of our community, says Mickey Bradford, who is national organizer at the Transgender Law Center. One of the things that Mickey has done is to help coordinate an initiative there, which is the Agenda for Trans Liberation. And their very first pillar, the thing that they are emphasizing in that, is the leadership of Black trans women and Black trans femmes. Earlier today, I had a chance to speak with her about that and how Black trans women and Black trans femmes are responding to the COVID crisis. So take a look. Hi, Mickey. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Hey, Imara.
Hi. Well, first off, before we launch into all the things, how are you?
Whew. I'm doing all right, considering everything that is happening in the world right now. I have been through in the last week feelings of grief, of confusion, anger at just the systems that allowed us to get to this point, and a little bit of boredom, honestly.
Well, okay. Well, hopefully this will alleviate some of your boredom, at least for the next 10 minutes. But thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people can relate to the feelings that you're going through. I think we all are and can. But one of the amazing things that you're moving is the trans liberation agenda. And the very first pillar of that is to center the leadership of Black trans women and Black trans femmes. It's interesting because in this moment, that's what's happening across the board in terms of the response of our community. And so I'm wondering what you think it is about the leadership of Black trans women and Black trans femmes that is essential right now.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. I'm really excited about the Trans Agenda for Liberation and the Black trans women and Black trans femmes who a part of shaping this first pillar, um, launched it with the hope that it would honor the unique and invaluable wisdom, the experience, the leadership of Black trans women and Black trans femmes, because it's overlooked very easily across movements, across our society at large. And what Black trans women and Black trans femmes know that no one else knows is the unique experience of being Black, gender, non-binary, non-conforming, gender variant, and having to navigate living in this world with those identities. And that teaches us that actually none of these systems that are set up are there to serve us. We know that, we call it out every day, and it's what makes us fierce.
Mm-hmm. But what from those experiences that you're talking about, life at the intersections makes Black trans femmes and Black trans women vital leaders?
Well, I'll say that to your point, Black trans women and Black trans femmes in this epidemic responded very quickly. Um, they knew from years of experience that our communities have always lacked three things, three very basic things: housing, income, and food, right? And so it was clear, right, that trans femmes who were leading organizations that fight for the rights of Black trans women, Black trans femmes, and trans communities at large knew that in this moment, those are the three things that people need most. And so they've been at work raising money primarily for street sex workers, for Black trans women who are also migrants to this country, right, who will not get a stimulus check to help with COVID, right? The folks who are left out of these systems that are set up.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is essential to supporting the leadership of Black trans femmes and Black trans women? Because in order for the response to go on and have an impact, it has to be supported, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I really encourage folks to read the first pillar of the Trans Agenda for Liberation in its entirety, because the very first demand is trust our leadership. Trust the leadership of Black trans women and Black trans femmes. And that means that across the board, what we are asking for is a shift in the value of Black trans leadership, the value of Black trans lives. And that value is both a cultural value, right? So that we see more Black trans women and Black trans femmes at the forefront of our media, hired to produce more media that actually tells our stories. But it also means that we are just investing in young Black trans women, Black trans femmes, particularly in elder Black trans women who have survived a lot and have the stories to tell. These are the people that we need to be listening to, resourcing, and providing safety for.
Mickey, but one of the things I've heard you say is that valuing and resourcing isn't only about money, but it's also about creating these larger pipelines of opportunity and leadership. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Absolutely. We know that Black trans women and Black trans femmes have been building networks of healing in our own communities without support for a very long time. And so what would it look like, right, if those systems of healing that we've already developed, that we know are culturally competent, that we know get the support directly to our folks, if those systems were supported, right? If those healers were actually allowed to have access into higher education. For instance, the American Medical Association recently said that they see the murders of Black trans women and Black trans femmes as an epidemic, a public health epidemic. If it's a public health epidemic and you are naming that you are the definitive source for medical information and the training of medical folks on the front lines. Let us train up Black trans women and Black trans femmes so that they can get that access and heal each other, because it's not about other folks coming into our communities, right? And helping us out and then leaving. What we are asking for is a shift in power, a shift in resources, a shift in access. And we're not asking for it anymore. That time has passed. We're demanding at this point. It is a demand.
I mean, what a different world it would be if we had legions of Black trans women and Black trans femmes doctors at this moment in time. As an activist right now, is anything giving you hope?
There's so much giving me hope. Oh my, I'm so glad you asked. I just want to say that I see so many of our folks across the nation responding to this moment with the attitude that it is not just about them, that they are connected to the trans person in New York City, to the trans person navigating life in Albany, Georgia, right? And these are two epicenters of the pandemic right now. And those trans people are navigating different lives, but they know that they are connected by a community. And that gives me hope. It gives me hope that we'll be able to connect with each other, that we'll be able to protect each other in these times, that we'll be able to protect our legacy of resilience and resistance in hard times.
I think that all sounds right to me. So one last question, because everything that we're talking about today is very, very heavy, although you've helped to end us on a hopeful note in this segment. Now I know that you're a big fan of Southern trap music. So what are you listening to right now that's helping you get through? What Southern trap artists are you bouncing to? Because I know you like to bounce.
I do love to biggity bounce it. Right now, I'm really getting into Baby Mother. She's an artist from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Just bad, Black. Just get into it. She's very witchy. You just have to get into it for yourself. Her flow is very different. And it's what we need for these times, honestly.
Well, now I have something new to look up on Spotify. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your leadership. Continue to be safe and be well.
Thank you so much for having me, Imara.
Thank you.
Shout out to everybody out here trying to stay connected to all this trans beauty, trans joy, trans hope, and happy Trans Day of Visibility.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So that was Mickey Bradford, who is national organizer at the Transgender Law Center, who is working there with groups across the country on the agenda for the agenda for trans liberation, whose first pillar is the emphasis on the need for leadership of Black trans femmes and Black trans women. Of course, visit TLC's website to read more about that initiative and to see how you can get involved. So we ended with what Nikki was listening to. We're now going to go on to what we should be reading. That's why we're thrilled to talk to author and contributing editor at them, Meredith Toulousan, on their upcoming new book, Ferris, which comes out on May 26th. But Meredith also organized, like India, a mutual aid project in the wake of the COVID crisis to give direct cash grants to people as a sign of how necessary that is. Thank you so much for joining us, Meredith.
Hi, Imara. It's so wonderful to see you.
Nice to see you.
Day.
Nice to see you. I should say, Meredith's pronouns are also she and hers.
And they, them.
And they, them. And they, them. See, this is why you got to do this. People have to do this. Thank you for joining us. So again, how are you as Meredith, the person, before we talk about Meredith, the author?
Materially, I'm okay. Like I have a good support system. I have friends. I'm here in the Catskills. We moved up here about a year ago. And so I'm in a place where I can go outside, and that has made a really big difference. I'm with my spouse and my dog. But at the same time, it's also a very strange feeling, right? Like not to be able to help as directly as I would have if I were still in Brooklyn. And also, yeah, just really thinking about a lot of people in our community and in my various communities struggling has definitely been really difficult. Yeah.
Right. Well, either in Brooklyn or not, you did find a way to help, and it was noticed, and it made a difference in the lives of the people that received the help. So you are there. One of the questions that I had, and one of the reasons why I thought it was really important to have you essentially end the program almost, is that your story of Embedded in Ferris, I think, is one that is one of hope, of having to deal through all of these adversities and various intersections of being born albino in the Philippines, growing up in a rural area, moving to the United States as an immigrant, and having to balance all of that. And that one of the things that strikes me in the book overall that I think is really important are just the various ways that you created family and community. It's like a thread that runs through. And so I'm wondering if you can contextualize for us how you think that that's helped you come through various adversities.
Yeah, I mean, I think for people who don't know my story, I am estranged from both of my parents and have been for a long time for reasons that actually not having to do with me being trans. They both have had a lot of addiction issues, and like I had a really troubled childhood, but at the same time, I feel like part of that, and one of the silver linings of that kind of upbringing, is that it really is intuitive for me to be able to find community, to be able to to find my chosen family within whatever situation that I'm in, and that forming community is simultaneously about receiving help from people and receiving support from people, but is also just as much about giving that help, about providing it without really thinking about whatever it is that you're expecting in return, right? And I've been very fortunate to have had like many friends and chosen family. There were like when Imara was mentioning that I did post on Instagram that like I had a certain amount of money to be able to support people, and spontaneously people in my friendship group who are not like who were actually primarily not trans, which I think is important because of the fact that it actually is really important for people in more privileged positions to be able to help queer and trans people, especially queer and trans people of color, and especially Black trans women and femmes at this particular time. It was really great to feel like I was able to be kind of a conduit through which, through which funds can be distributed from, like cis people to trans people, right?
One of the questions that I had is, because you've come through all of these different circumstances that I just glanced upon, because that's all we can do in this particular format, lots of different types of adversities. I'm wondering if you can just dig a little bit deeper on what you mentioned just now, which is what in your own personal history gives you confidence to be able to know that a future is still possible, even at really tough times.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the Philippines, and the Philippines is a country that experiences an enormous number of natural disasters on a regular basis, in addition to having, like a really chaotic political system. So growing up, like I lived through a dictatorship up until I was 8. I lived through 5 coup attempts, like during that entire period, like a couple of volcanic eruptions, like one major earthquake, like dozens of typhoons, right? And I think that having that experience definitely helps me in order to really, to have some emotional tools, right? Like one of the things that I talked a lot about on Twitter is that you shouldn't feel guilty for laughing or for having moments of levity and having fun, because those are the moments that would allow you to reinvigorate yourself, to be able to help people later, to be able to have the emotional space to, because if we exhaust ourselves, like being sad and crying and like despairing all the time, then it actually doesn't, like it ultimately doesn't help us, and it also doesn't help the communities that we're trying to serve. And and it is really true that for me, helping people is just as invigorating to me as like I hope the help is to other people. And that's like that's been a really important part of my coping with the crisis that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah. I also would be curious, as an immigrant to this country, the ways in which it stands out for you that, over the past 4 years, immigrants have been vilified in so many ways, and literally imprisoned. Many say illegally, that's being contested right now. But at this moment in time, so many of the people that we are relying upon for our survival are immigrants. And I'm just wondering if that juxtaposition, how that reads to you, as an immigrant and an observer here in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like, like many people who come from immigrant communities, who come from other countries, come from countries that have really strong collective spirits, right? Including, like including my own. So when people, like when people were thanking me on Instagram for, sort of distributing money, I really feel like, like this is the duty of any person in this country who has, who has resources to spare. Like we shouldn't be thankful to generous people who have resources. This is actually our moral and ethical responsibility at this moment in time, right? And I feel like so many people who come from immigrant backgrounds have that spirit, not just because of the fact that they come from countries that are more collective, that are more collectivist, but also because we've had to necessarily form networks among ourselves to survive, right? We've necessarily had to reach out to people because otherwise, we would be incredibly isolated. And I think that, and I think that this pandemic has been really testing this sort of American idea that, that we are individuals and that, like the only people that we need to look out for is ourselves. This is a time when we really have to look out for each other.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, I'm wondering, your book comes out in the middle of May. Most likely we'll still be in some form of quarantine at that time. Your book, Fairest, May 26th. What do you hope that people will get from that? And maybe you could even split it. What do you hope that trans and gender non-conforming people will get from your book? And what do you hope for those that who are not a part of our community directly will get from what you've authored?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, look, we are in the middle of this crisis. And, and I think that people reading the book, queer and trans people reading the book now will definitely, like one of the things that I really want people to get out of the book is that we don't have to make ourselves respectable for other people, right? Like we should not need to, we don't need to lie to medical practitioners to be able to get the care what we need that we need. We don't need to sort of like tell stories that aren't completely true to psychologists. Like this book for me is, is my complete truth. And it was a very conscious effort on my part to not think about what people would think of me. Like, this is just what has happened to me in my life, right? In my journey as a trans person. And that's something that I think is really, really important for trans people to be able to do, because for so long, our experiences have been so medicalized and politicized, right? And then for cis people, I do think that, that I really do hope that the book would allow them to really understand that each trans person's individual story is individual to them, right? And that, reading the book would allow them a glimpse into one person's story, not as a way of being like, okay, like, I've already read this trans story, so then, like, I know what it's like to be trans, right? That it would allow them to really understand that, oh, like, if there's this individual trans story, there must be, every trans person must have their own story. And any trans person that I interact with, I need to be able to relate to the specific story of that trans person, rather than, just trying to impose my stereotypes and what trans people are supposed to be.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for your thoughts tonight, for your activism, for your authorship, for the role that you played as a leading journalist at Condé Nast Them, where you're still a contributing editor. We're looking forward to reading Fairest on May 26th when it comes out, and really appreciate you joining us tonight, Meredith.
Thank you so much. It's an incredible honor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You are watching Lives at Stake, which is a monthly discussion series. We are about to end our program shortly, but you can still continue to join the conversation across our social media channels by following hashtag Lives at Stake and hashtag Translash. We want your comments and your questions as we continue to move forward. So, creativity is a huge part of the trans and gender nonconforming community, as you can see tonight from authors, actresses, a full range of creativity. So we thought it only fitting to end tonight with the poetry of Swai Pham. Now, Swai's day job, by their own admission, is a digital media sorceress at the Transgender Law Center, but she's also an artist and a poet, and her poem Girls came to me through a program at Forward Together as part of their Artists and Poets project for Trans Day of Remembrance, which they have relabeled Trans Day of Resilience. So now on to the poetry of Swai Pham.
Girls. Remember when she drifted along the surface of the ocean, hair like kelp reflecting the surface of the sun, the whales extending their foreheads to graze her shoulder. Her gaze rests on the gray cloud miles away, inching towards her Samoa. A few moments later, the sky opens with a hot downpour. She submerges her brown head into the Pacific, becomes ocean, gives baby whales wet kisses, peels back layers of coastline to reveal the volcanic rock that whispers a secret. I'm not going anywhere. She is alive. Lights flash bright red, then blue. What did she know about saving lives? She was someone's baby girl, pumpkin, angel, love dumpling, little one. Here she is on Atlantic Avenue at the house with the fig tree that reminds her of Cameroon. The police car that she hijacked sits idly outside. Sirens no longer work. She packs her powder pink duffel with playing cards, rope, a teddy bear named Raven, Sour Patch Kids, castor oil, and a red canvas notebook. She passes the painting on the wall, of a full circle rainbow glittering around a white sun. Outside the door, a family of maybe 500, their bellies so accustomed to the pain of uncontrollable laughter. The best part about being a trans girl is keeping the world secret in your chest. We are shards of sea glass. You see yourself in us, big and wide, spines long enough to play with purple clouds. In the beginning, there was us. In the end, here we are. Here I am, made of the same stuff as my grandmother and her grandmother and the mushrooms that sprouted before her. Lift your head, close your eyes. Do you hear yourself breathing? Thank you.
Swai, that was amazing. And I love that poem because at this time of darkness, I think there's so much hope in it because it underscores that we've always been here. And I'm just wondering, what made you write this? You, of course, wrote it before, long before now. What made you write this? What was the driving force behind it?
Well, first, thank you, Imara, for having me in the company of so much brilliance. This poem was really dedicated to all of the trans elders and trans ancestors who have built up the collective imagination, the courage, and the resilience that continues to live in our DNA. I think I really wanted to honor folks like Lorena Borjas, who has left us this week, Cecilia Chung, Isis Hanen, who inspired the first part of the poem, Octavia St. Laurent, Benji Ra, Sylvia Rivera, all just magic makers, right, who were inspirations for this poem and who are just a few of the millions and millions of trans people who've helped transform our world through history. I really wanted to tap into the pure magic that I witness in my trans sisters and siblings, and the magic that we possess in our bones, right? As descendants of shamans, mediums, healers, warriors, and scholars. So yeah, I think this poem is also a celebration of our brilliance, and it also is a challenge to all people, not just trans people, to search deep inside themselves for something more expansive than they had imagined.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing the poem and for sharing your artistry. For everyone who's watching, a link to Swai's poem is actually in the feed, so you can go there to look at it again and to share it. Feel free to share poems that are getting you through in this moment. And again, thank you so much, Swai.
Thank you, Mara.
That was the poetry of Swai Pham. Her poem Girls is actually accessible in the thread right now. So if you go there, you can actually read it and share it, which I know would mean a lot to her. At the core of her poem, of course, is the idea, like I said in the segment, that we've had a past. That's how we know that we're going to have a future. Actually, 2 weeks ago, the topic for this particular program was going to be the future of trans. We have a clip that we wanted to show you for that. That's also going to be in our timeline. It's from Andy Mara, who's the executive director of the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. In the clip, she emphasizes the fact that the power of our ancestors is the way that we will be able to get through this moment. And of course, in terms of ancestors, we're now thinking about Lorena Borjas, who has become an ancestor. At the end of this program, there will be an in memoriam tribute to her. Well, there it is now, going right now as a part of our thoughts. Thank you for joining us on our very first Lives at Stake. The next Lives at Stake will be on April the 28th, fitting as a part of our tribute to Lorena. We will be focusing on the role of sex work in our community and whether or not the COVID crisis points to the fact that we need to legalize perhaps legalize or decriminalize sex work in order to make sure that all members of our community can have access to the services that everyone else does. We hope that you will join us for that on April the 28th. Thank you for joining us for this very first Lives at Stake. Go to translash.org, sign up for our weekly newsletter. The same is true for WNYC, the Green Space. And more than anything, I hope that you have left tonight with a sense of hope, with a sense of that the way that we can respond is by coming together in this moment. That's how we've always made it. That's how we will continue to make it. And the reason why we should have hope at this moment is because we exist. Thank you for joining us. Be well and be safe.